Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to talk about some interesting numbers that have come out on the 92nd Oscars, which happened last night. Now, according to the ratings polls, this year's Oscars has actually done the worst numbers since they actually started recording them back in 1974 for television ratings. And that's something to be mildly concerned about for the Oscars because a lot of people were saying this year that because of the slate of films and because they were kind of carrying on the whole hostless theme of the Oscars, that this year was going to be an uptick like it was last year. Because up until 2018, every single year the Oscars had seen declining numbers. Until last year. Last year there was an uptick, so a lot of the television producers thought like, oh, okay, we'll just continue this and we'll see how this works out. Because last year you also had a few big films that were involved. You had Black Panther with won 3 Oscars last year, and then you also had A Star Is Born, which took away a lot of Oscars with it. And this year you had an even more star-studded cast with a lot more well-known directors putting films in, and there was a lot going on this year from the perspective of Best Picture, and also the fact that the movie Parasite apparently won Best Picture. That's a little interesting to me as well. But I'd be more than curious to see what the voting was, what the numbers actually were among the people in the Academy who voted, how high of a percentage it was for the film Parasite. But I digress. The point that I'm trying to get across is that this year they saw a significant dip, even more so than in 2018, to the point where it was the lowest numbers they had ever recorded at, I believe, 23.6 million viewers. Now, there's a few different factors that go into this. Sometimes these things get kind of twisted a little bit. I'm not 100% sure if that includes streaming numbers. People that were, because you can technically, ABC was streaming this on their website. If you had an account from a valid cable provider, you could actually watch it via the ABC website on a live cast. But aside from that, there were no actual live broadcasts other than the main television broadcast of the Oscars, which I think is also something else that's kind of hurting those numbers in the long run because a lot of people have canceled their cable subscriptions. A lot of people don't do that anymore. They just do streaming services and they watch stuff on the internet, really. So if ABC, if you don't have a cable provider, you couldn't have watched that on their website, which I think is a major hit to their numbers, considering that, kind of streaming is the way to go, even though I do understand the Academy's perspective of their kind of in the the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, has kind of been at war with Netflix to an extent because a lot of seats on that are being held by large studios, the Disneys, the Warner Brothers, the Universals, the Fox. I was gonna say the Foxes, but Fox is under Disney now. But the big studios have people on that board, but Netflix does not. At least not to my knowledge currently. But Netflix has been trying to break into it for years, and once they cement themselves in there, they're never going anywhere. And movie studios hate that idea because they've been at war with Netflix for years now, and Disney has been trying their best to try. Disney is probably coming the closest, and they've dumped a ungodly amount of money into trying to dethrone Netflix as the streaming king. And Netflix hasn't been doing much to help themselves lately anyway. But that's the other thing is Netflix had 2 horses in the race for Best Picture. They had Marriage Story with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson, and then they also had The Irishman from Martin Scorsese. So there were 2, especially with The Irishman, very likely candidates for Best Picture. And I'm actually very surprised that Parasite won over The Irishman and over some of those other films, especially considering that I believe it's the first foreign language film to win Best Picture. So that's something that's kind of interesting going into this. But regardless of that, the Hollywood or the people that were in charge of the award ceremony basically figured that because they had so many high-profile films, even though Parasite would wind up being the one that would win the night on Best Director and Best Film, they figured that those other films would bring in enough of an audience, and it didn't. Now, like I said, there's a few different things that are going into that. I think one other thing might be because there was a lot of controversy around last year's Oscars involving the Kevin Hart situation, where he dropped out and they couldn't get a host because it was too toxic of waters. There was a lot of drama going around the Oscars in 2019, and the fact of the matter is that that wound up drawing in a, probably a decent amount of viewers, because the idea it goes to the idea of any publicity is good publicity, and that's kind of what we see there. Um, and I have no doubt that some people just watched it out of curiosity because, oh, the first year the Oscars aren't going to have a host. So, but the thing is, you were going to see a dip off next year because you didn't have any controversy with this one, at least not for the most part. Everything kind of went along smoothly. They didn't have the host again, which they advertised to no end. It's like, oh, we're going to do this whole hostless thing again and see how it works. Um, now, not to say that 23.6 million isn't a very large number, but compared to some past years with the Oscars, it is dwindled drastically, and I think this is going to wind up affecting the show because the thing is, again, like I was saying before, is that there were a few factors that went into this whole thing, and I think another factor that can't really be ignored is the distancing from the general public that Hollywood has been doing over the last 10 to 15 years. When was the last time you can remember a major, blockbuster film winning Best Picture? And I can only think back to, um, you know, Star is Born it was kind of a blockbuster, but it wasn't like a tour de force type of thing. It was a drama that people really kind of loved. But I'd say maybe that one. But the only other one that comes to mind is stuff like early 2000s. Stuff like Gladiator from Ridley Scott. That was when that won Best Picture in 2000. Or I believe the year after, or it might have been 2002, was Cinderella Man as well, which was another big one for Russell Crowe. But for the most part, a lot of blockbusters have not been up for Best Picture. It's been a lot of these very, I don't want to say indie films, but very niche films. Stuff that's very artsy that a lot of the times does not appeal to the general public. And that's not to say that the general public is ill informed on the way that they go about film. But the point is that you have you have a flurry of different film goers that go to films over the course of the year. You have the very picky film goer, the art house guy, the one that he's very kind of attention to detail. Doesn't watch all the schlock. The popcorn cinema is horrible. Stuff like that. Then you have your blockbuster people, the people that really only go out for those really big films. And then the third one, which I think I kind of fall into, is really the person that kind of just the film lover in general, the person that'll sit down and they can enjoy, a lot of different things, and it doesn't really matter the genre or the people that are in it or what's going on or what the budget was, as long as you're entertained to an extent. That's kind of I think that's probably where I fall into. But there's really three different kinds of film goers, and for the most part, the Oscars really only applies to that first kind of film goer, that kind of picky, artsy type of film goer, which I understand makes sense because the Academy has kind of been. They've always been on the side of more art housey films as opposed to any kind of like action vehicles or CGI fest and stuff like that. So I kind of understand that, but at the same time, you alienate those other two categories of film goer that might potentially watch your show. And then, of course, you also have the people that just watch the award shows for the sake of actually watching the award shows because they like to watch the celebrities. And that's the third one that's also being lost now too, because you see that. And again, this is not something that's incredibly new, but it is something that is becoming more and more prevalent in today's kind of cultural environment. And that's the idea that a lot of people use these award shows as platforms, which again is fine. They can make that choice. They're free to make that choice if they want to. But at the same time, it does alienate a lot of people because a person like let's say this. I love The Revenant. I think The Revenant is an amazing film. I'm glad DiCaprio won for it. I think he deserved that Oscar. But I don't really like DiCaprio as a person. He seems like he's kind of a dipshit. Um, it's one of those things you can really love somebody professionally, but you can hate them on a personal level, or at least be indifferent to them on a personal level. And I think that's kind of what a lot of these actors don't get, is that nobody gives a shit about their personal lives for the most part, unless it's, who's screwing who. They don't care what they think for the most part. And when they start speaking their mind in that sense and they go away from the film aspect of the award ceremony, it alienates a good portion of the crowd. I don't want to say a lot of the crowd, but I'd say a decent portion of it. So I think that those gaps have been growing for a number of years with all of those groups. And this is just what we're seeing. They're saying it now because it's coming to a head and the numbers keep dropping and dropping and dropping, and technically they say they don't know what to do. What you need to do is you need to try and squeeze the politics out of your award shows, which is going to be next to impossible considering the people that are going to be receiving awards. Or you need to kind of keep doing what you did this year and, bring in movies that people loved and people watched over the course of the year. Stop being such snooty art people and just give the movies that deserve the credit. And I think that for the most part, I think that the people that won this year were probably deserving of it. I think Brad Pitt was deserving of Best Supporting Actor. I think that Joaquin Phoenix is deserving of Best Actor. Lorna Dern, I didn't see Marriage Story, so I have no idea if she was deserving of that. I still remember her from Last Jedi. And I think Renee Zellweger, they were saying she was going to win for Judy like 2-3 months ago. So that's not really that big of a surprise. But again, I feel like these. I feel like the Oscars is going to keep dipping in ratings until they kind of commit to something. Because I think they should commit to the model that they have now, because I think it is better than the previous model. But now they're all, they're talking about kind of going back on that. They're talking about, getting somebody like a Dwayne Johnson or something, which, by the way, I don't think he'd be signing up for that, considering that his friend Kevin Hart got royally boned over when he tried to host. So I don't think Dwayne Johnson is going to be jumping at the chance to host the Oscars necessarily. But the thing is, I think you should go on with the no host. And I think you should continue to feature high-profile films that were good but also made money and the public knows about, because you're going to attract people eventually. You're going to attract cinema people back, which is really mostly the people that watch those type of award shows is cinema people. It's not your average Joe. For somebody, somebody that doesn't go and see movies, somebody that doesn't like movies, somebody that doesn't like cinema in general, they're not going to sit down and watch the Oscars unless they're just an award show nut. So you don't need to market to those people. You need to market to the movie people. And the movie people don't want to hear about your theories on, movie people don't want to hear about your theories on how there's inequality in society and all that stuff. Look, if you want to go to a college lecture hall and lecture to people, be my guest. If they'll let you in and they'll let you talk to people, then go ahead and talk to people. I really don't care. But the people that watch those shows don't want to hear you talk about dumb shit unless it's related to the film. Maybe go up there and tell a very short little funny story about the production, or say how much you love this actor, or maybe thank you and thank you and thank you for making this possible. Stuff like that, instead of talking about how polar bears are pissed because shit's melting. I don't really give that much of a crap. But the point still stands. But those are kind of my feelings on why the ratings to the Oscars have been dipping and continue to dip. But I want to know what your opinion is. Do you watch the Oscars? Do you think the show has kind of gone downhill in recent years? Do you not enjoy the new format that they have, where they don't have a host and stuff like that? Do you like the old format, or vice versa? Do you like the new format? Or are you like me and you don't really give that much of a crap? You just kind of look up the winners the next day just for shits and giggles. Leave your thoughts in the comments as usual. Again, I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe. And remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?